So of course, this is where we're going to start talking about our bulletproof single.
All right, everybody come on.
Everybody's back up. This is the last time you have to be up in front of you.
We need one more participant, which is going to be Mike here. Mike's going to be something called the GUID table. So how this is going to be a little different. Where is our? Hey, he looks good. Need you to hold that behind your back for a moment. How this is going to be a little different is that in the previous SSO, the basic SSO, there really wasn't any sort of double check that what was being passed from the portal to the presentation server was actually a valid handshake. If I'm a hacker trying to get into the system, I could actually fake out the presentation server and say, here's something that looks good to you, and the presentation server is just going to pass that on down the line and potentially allow that person to get into the system in a sort of a compromised way. So now we're going to show a step where we're going to make that significantly harder to have happen. So our first step is the same, and user's going to log into the portal. And the portal needs to find out, is this a valid end user? So what did you do before? Yep, do the same thing. We got to authenticate that user against LDAP. And LDAP's going to say, person's good. So we're going to pass it back. So now, before you do this step, you're getting a little ahead of yourself there. Before we do that step, we're actually going to introduce the second Frisbee. And the second Frisbee represents sort of a double check, if you will, to make sure that this person is really a valid user in the system. So the portal is actually going to do two things at the same time. And we're not going to make you actually throw at the same time. That could be dangerous. So we'll start with the one that you're familiar with, going to the presentation server. So that's going to be the green one. And you're going to take the red one and pass that over, we got a little bit farther of a throw here, to the GUID table. And basically what this red Frisbee represents is the portal authenticated the user. So the portal knows who this user is. So the portal sends the GUID table the username and a randomly generated number, as well as a timestamp. And the GUID table is going to store that in a row in the database. And we're going to use that a little bit later. So the presentation server now actually has the regular credentials for the user, and it's going to go over to the BI server, just like it did before. Except this time the BI server is not going to go right to the database table to get our authorization information. The BI server is going to do a check first. It's going to pass those credentials that it got from the presentation server, which it got from the portal, and is going to make sure that's a real user and is not someone trying to spoof the system. So the BI server is going to throw this over to the GUID table. And basically what happens here when it does that, it's going to check. So in this credential is actually the randomly generated number that the portal made up. It's going to check, do these randomly generated numbers match each other for the given user in question? In addition to that, not only that, but it's also going to do it within a certain time frame. So that timestamp that we wrote into the table when the portal passed that over, we're going to add in a second check that says this has got to happen within 10 seconds or 15 seconds or whatever is a reasonable period of time. And the reason being is because we want that GUID to expire if it's not used, if it's not checked within a certain period of time. And 10 seconds, 15 seconds, this is what we've used it to most customers. You can decide what the appropriate length of time is or how long that lasts. So if the BI server actually waited a long time to validate that randomly generated GUID against this table, it would fail because it didn't do it within the appropriate period of time. This prevents someone trying to spoof the system from actually maybe hacking their way into this table, finding out what that GUID is, and then deciding to try to pass that GUID through the system. If it's not within a quick period of time, sorry, you're not getting it. So at this point, the GUID table says, so we're going to run through two scenarios here. We're going to run through a valid one. The GUID table says, yep, you're valid. So he's going to pass the green one back to the BI server. The BI server at this point is going to do its normal authentication or authorization against the database table. Database table is going to pass it back to the BI server and says, here's what you can see, and back to the presentation server, and back to the end user in terms of what they're allowed to see. Now let's pretend that someone was trying to compromise the system, and the GUIDs didn't match, or wasn't done within the right period of time. The GUID table is going to send back a not valid response, hence the red frisbee. The BI server doesn't really know any better. When it does its sort of normal login stream, it kind of still has to go through its normal course of operations, even though we gave it a not valid response. So it's going to go to the database table. The database table is going to say, what the heck is this? I don't know what this is. And then pass it right back to the BI server with no information about that non-user, because that's not a real user at this point in time. BI server is going to return that to the presentation server and say, I got nothing for you. Presentation server is going to return it to the user, and the user is actually going to see not logged in. They're not actually going to get into the system at all.
So you said the database isn't going to know who the user is at all, even if it is just another user that's valid?
Well, what we actually send back when we configure this all in OPIE, if this is not a valid response, we actually set a variable with something called invalid user. So the username actually is literally invalid user.
So we shouldn't call anyone that.
Exactly. If someone has that name, maybe we should use not good user, something like that.